In the annals of contemporary criminal history, few cases have captured public attention and sparked as much controversy as the prosecution of Ghislaine Maxwell, the British socialite who became the central figure in one of the most high-profile sex trafficking cases of the 21st century. Her conviction in December 2021 for her role in Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation marked the culmination of a legal saga that exposed the dark underbelly of wealth, power, and exploitation in elite social circles. Ghislaine Noël Marion Maxwell was born on December 25, 1961, in Maisons-Laffitte, France, as the youngest of 9 children born to Elizabeth and Robert Maxwell. Her birth into extraordinary privilege and power would shape not only her worldview but also provide her with the social connections and resources that would later enable her criminal activities. Robert Maxwell, her father, was one of the most controversial and powerful media moguls of the late 20th century. Born as Jan Ludwig Hyman Benjamin Hawk in Czechoslovakia, he had reinvented himself as a British publishing magnate who controlled newspapers, book publishers, and media companies across Europe and America. His empire included the Daily Mirror, Macmillan Publishers, and the New York Daily News, giving the Maxwell family enormous influence in media and political circles. The Maxwell household was characterized by extreme wealth, international connections, and a culture of entitlement that normalized the idea that rules applied differently to those with money and influence. Robert Maxwell was known for his domineering personality, his volatile temper, and his willingness to use any means necessary to achieve his goals. These traits would later be reflected in Ghislaine's own approach to relationships and problem-solving. Elizabeth Maxwell, Ghislaine's mother, came from French Protestant Huguenot stock and provided a counterbalance to her husband's more explosive personality. However, she was largely overshadowed by her husband's dominant presence and struggled to maintain stability in a household characterized by Robert's unpredictable behavior and frequent absences. Growing up in this environment, Ghislaine learned early that wealth and connections could solve almost any problem and that social rules were flexible for those who possessed sufficient power. She attended prestigious schools, moved in elite social circles, and developed the charm and sophistication that would later make her an effective facilitator for Jeffrey Epstein's operation. The family's lifestyle was opulent even by the standards of the ultra-wealthy. They owned multiple homes around the world, traveled by private jet, entertained politicians and celebrities, and lived as though normal social and legal constraints simply did not apply to them. This background would prove crucial in understanding how Ghislaine could later participate in criminal activities while maintaining the belief that her social status would protect her from consequences. Robert Maxwell's business practices were often ethically questionable and sometimes outright criminal, though his wealth and influence generally protected him from serious legal consequences during his lifetime. He was investigated for various financial improprieties, had connections to intelligence agencies, and was suspected of using his media empire for personal gain and political manipulation. These examples taught Ghislaine that the law was a tool that could be manipulated by those with sufficient resources and connections. Ghislaine's educational journey took her through some of the most prestigious institutions in the world, experiences that further reinforced her sense of entitlement and superiority while providing her with the social skills and connections that would later prove useful in her criminal career. She attended Marlborough College, an elite British boarding school known for producing members of the establishment and social elite. At Marlborough, Ghislaine developed the polished social skills and network of upper-class connections that would characterize her adult life. School contemporaries later described her as charming, intelligent, and socially adept, but also as someone who seemed to believe that normal rules didn't apply to her. Following her time at Marlborough, Ghislaine attended Balliol College, Oxford, where she studied modern history. Oxford provided her with both intellectual credentials and access to an even more elite social network that included future politicians, business leaders, and members of the aristocracy. Her time at university was marked by active participation in social events and the cultivation of relationships that would prove valuable throughout her life. During her university years, Ghislaine also began to display some of the manipulative tendencies that would later characterize her criminal behavior. Fellow students recalled her ability to charm authority figures while also being calculating in her personal relationships. She seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how to identify what people wanted and how to provide it in exchange for what she needed. Her academic performance was adequate but not exceptional, suggesting that her primary focus was on social rather than intellectual development. She understood that her family's wealth and connections were her greatest assets and focused on maximizing the value of these advantages rather than developing independent capabilities. The social skills she developed during these formative years would later prove crucial to her role in Epstein's operation. Her ability to put people at ease, to identify their vulnerabilities and desires, and to present herself as trustworthy and sophisticated made her an ideal facilitator for criminal activities that required gaining the trust of both victims and co-conspirators. Her educational experiences also reinforced her belief that she was part of an elite class that operated by different rules than ordinary people. The exclusive institutions she attended were filled with individuals who would go on to positions of power and influence, creating a network of contacts who shared similar assumptions about privilege and entitlement. The trajectory of Ghislaine's life changed dramatically on November 5, 1991, when her father Robert Maxwell died under mysterious circumstances after falling from his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, named after her, near the Canary Islands. His death not only represented a personal loss but also exposed the fraudulent foundation upon which the Maxwell family's wealth had been built. The investigation into Robert Maxwell's death revealed that he had stolen hundreds of millions of pounds from his company's pension funds to prop up his failing business empire. The Maxwell Communications Corporation and Mirror Group newspapers collapsed in scandal, leaving behind massive debts and thousands of employees whose pension funds had been looted. For Ghislaine, her father's death and the subsequent financial collapse represented a traumatic loss of both family and fortune. The woman who had grown up believing herself to be part of an untouchable elite suddenly found herself facing financial ruin and social disgrace. The family's assets were seized to pay creditors, and the Maxwell name became synonymous with fraud and betrayal. The psychological impact of this dramatic reversal of fortune cannot be overstated. Ghislaine had built her identity around her family's wealth and social status, and the sudden loss of both left her psychologically adrift and financially desperate. The comfortable assumption that her privileged background would always protect her was shattered, creating a psychological vulnerability that would influence her future decisions. In the aftermath of her father's death, Ghislaine faced not only financial pressure but also social ostracism from many of the elite circles where she had previously been welcomed. Former friends distanced themselves from the Maxwell family, and invitations to exclusive social events dried up. This social rejection was particularly painful for someone whose self-worth had been largely derived from her social status. The experience of watching her father's empire crumble while facing financial ruin and social disgrace created a desperate need to rebuild her life and regain her lost status. This desperation would make her particularly susceptible to Jeffrey Epstein's offer of financial security and social rehabilitation when they met in the early 1990s. The timing of her meeting with Epstein was crucial, as she was at her most vulnerable and in desperate need of someone who could provide both financial support and access to the elite social circles she had lost. Epstein's wealth and connections offered her a path back to the lifestyle and social status she had known, but at a price that would ultimately destroy her life and freedom. Ghislaine Maxwell first met Jeffrey Epstein in the early 1990s, shortly after her father's death and the collapse of her family's fortune. The exact circumstances of their meeting remain somewhat unclear, but it appears to have occurred through mutual social connections in New York's elite circles, where both moved despite their different backgrounds. Epstein, who was already established as a financier with mysterious sources of wealth, represented everything Ghislaine needed at that moment in her life. He possessed the financial resources to support the lavish lifestyle she had known since childhood, he had connections to powerful and wealthy individuals who could restore her social status, and he shared her belief that ordinary rules and moral constraints didn't apply to people with sufficient wealth and influence. From Epstein's perspective, Ghislaine offered something equally valuable. Her aristocratic background, her Oxford education, her sophisticated social skills, and her international connections made her the perfect partner for someone seeking to establish himself in elite society. Her ability to navigate high society and her talent for making people feel comfortable and special would prove invaluable to his various enterprises. The relationship that developed between them was complex and multifaceted, encompassing elements of romance, business partnership, and criminal conspiracy. While they may have been romantically involved in the early years, their connection evolved into something more strategic and mutually beneficial. Ghislaine provided Epstein with social credibility and access to elite circles, while he provided her with financial security and a path back to the privileged lifestyle she had lost. Contemporaries who observed their relationship noted the apparent symbiosis between them. Epstein, despite his wealth, often appeared uncomfortable in high society settings and relied on Ghislaine to smooth his way. She, in turn, seemed to bask in the reflected glory of his wealth and the social opportunities it provided. Their partnership also revealed shared psychological traits that made them compatible criminal collaborators. Both possessed narcissistic tendencies, a sense of entitlement, and a willingness to exploit others for their own benefit. Neither seemed capable of genuine empathy or remorse, qualities that would prove essential for their later criminal activities. The early years of their relationship were marked by extensive travel, lavish parties, and the cultivation of relationships with powerful individuals in politics, business, academia, and entertainment. These activities served both social and strategic purposes, building the network of contacts and relationships that would later provide protection and opportunities for their criminal enterprise. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein worked together to build an extensive network of relationships with some of the most powerful and influential people in the world. This network would serve multiple purposes, providing social status and legitimacy, creating opportunities for business ventures, and ultimately facilitating their criminal activities. Ghislaine's role in building this network was crucial, as her social skills and aristocratic background opened doors that might have remained closed to Epstein despite his wealth. She organized dinner parties, social gatherings, and charity events that brought together politicians, academics, business leaders, celebrities, and royalty in settings that appeared respectable and philanthropic. Among the notable figures who became part of their social circle were former President Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew of the British royal family, Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, and numerous other individuals holding positions of significant power and influence. These relationships provided both social credibility and potential protection from legal scrutiny. The cultivation of these relationships was strategic and methodical. Epstein and Maxwell would identify individuals who possessed power, influence, or access to valuable opportunities, and then develop relationships with them through a combination of social charm, financial incentives, and in some cases, compromising situations that could be used for leverage. Their social gatherings were legendary for their exclusivity and luxury, taking place at Epstein's various properties including his Manhattan townhouse, his estate in Palm Beach, Florida, his ranch in New Mexico, and his private island in the Virgin Islands. These locations provided both impressive settings for entertaining and private spaces where questionable activities could occur without public scrutiny. Ghislaine played a crucial role as hostess and facilitator at these gatherings, using her charm and social skills to put guests at ease while also identifying their interests, desires, and potential vulnerabilities. Her ability to make powerful men feel special and appreciated was a crucial component of their operation's success. The network they built also included individuals who provided professional services that enabled their activities, including lawyers who could provide legal protection, financial advisors who could manage complex transactions, pilots who could provide private transportation, and various other professionals who asked few questions in exchange for generous compensation. This extensive network served as both a shield and a weapon, providing protection from legal scrutiny while also creating opportunities for expanding their criminal activities. The relationships they cultivated made it difficult for law enforcement to investigate them without potentially embarrassing or implicating powerful individuals who had political and social influence. While Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein maintained the appearance of running legitimate businesses and engaging in philanthropic activities, evidence later revealed that they were operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise focused on the sexual exploitation of underage girls. Ghislaine's role in this operation was not that of a passive participant but rather that of an active facilitator and organizer. The criminal operation typically began with the recruitment of vulnerable young girls, often from troubled backgrounds or difficult family situations that made them susceptible to manipulation. These girls were typically approached with offers of modeling opportunities, educational assistance, or simply friendship and support. Ghislaine played a crucial role in this recruitment process, as her maternal demeanor and sophisticated appearance made her seem trustworthy to both the girls and their families. Once girls were recruited into their orbit, Ghislaine would work to normalize inappropriate behavior and gradually break down their boundaries and resistance. She would present herself as a mentor and friend while simultaneously introducing them to increasingly inappropriate situations. Her ability to make the girls feel special and chosen was a crucial component of the grooming process. The normalization process involved gradually escalating physical contact and sexual discussions while providing the girls with gifts, money, and experiences they would not otherwise have had access to. Ghislaine would present this grooming as education or sophistication, convincing the girls that they were being prepared for success in elite society. Ghislaine also played an important role in managing the logistics of the criminal operation. She scheduled appointments, coordinated travel, managed properties where abuses occurred, and maintained the complex scheduling required to provide a steady stream of victims to Epstein and potentially to other men in their network. Her involvement extended to direct participation in some of the abusive activities. Several victims later testified that Maxwell had been present during sexual abuse, had participated in some activities, and had used these experiences to further manipulate and control the girls by making them feel complicit in their own victimization. The criminal enterprise operated for years without detection due to a combination of factors. The victims were from marginalized backgrounds and were often not believed when they tried to report abuse. The perpetrators had significant wealth and legal resources to intimidate victims and witnesses. The network of powerful associates provided protection from serious investigation, and the sophisticated grooming process made many victims feel complicit or responsible for their own abuse. The criminal operation run by Epstein and Maxwell employed sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques that were designed to identify, recruit, groom, and control their victims. Ghislaine's role in developing and implementing these techniques was crucial to the operation's success and longevity. The recruitment phase typically targeted girls who displayed specific vulnerabilities that made them susceptible to manipulation. These might include financial desperation, family dysfunction, low self-esteem, social isolation, or dreams of success in modeling or entertainment. Ghislaine had developed considerable skill at identifying these vulnerabilities and tailoring her approach accordingly. The initial contact was always designed to appear innocent and beneficial to the potential victim. Ghislaine might approach a girl with offers of modeling opportunities, educational assistance, or simply friendship and mentorship. Her sophisticated appearance, apparent wealth, and maternal demeanor made her appear trustworthy to both potential victims and their families. Once a girl was recruited, the grooming process would begin gradually and subtly. Ghislaine would shower the girl with attention, gifts, and opportunities while simultaneously beginning to normalize inappropriate behavior and break down personal boundaries. This process was designed to create emotional dependence while gradually desensitizing the victim to increasingly inappropriate situations. The normalization of sexual behavior was a gradual process that often began with discussions about sexuality that were presented as educational or sophisticated. Ghislaine would present herself as worldly and experienced, offering to educate the girls about topics their families or schools might not discuss. This positioned her as a trusted source of information and guidance. Physical boundary violations also began gradually, often presented as normal behavior among sophisticated people or as necessary for modeling or massage training. The incremental nature of these violations made it difficult for victims to identify a clear moment when appropriate behavior crossed into abuse, creating confusion and self-doubt that prevented resistance. The operation also employed financial incentives and lifestyle benefits to maintain control over victims. Girls were paid for their participation and were provided with experiences and opportunities they would not otherwise have had access to. This created a form of economic dependence that made it difficult for victims to extricate themselves from the situation. Psychological manipulation also involved creating a sense of specialness and exclusivity around the victim's participation. They were told they were chosen because they were particularly beautiful, intelligent, or sophisticated, and that their involvement in the operation made them part of an exclusive world of wealth and power that ordinary people could never access. The criminal enterprise operated by Epstein and Maxwell began to face legal scrutiny in the mid-2000s when several victims came forward with allegations of sexual abuse. The initial investigations revealed both the scope of their criminal activities and the challenges faced by law enforcement when investigating crimes committed by wealthy and well-connected individuals. The first major investigation began in 2005 when the Palm Beach Police Department received reports that Jeffrey Epstein had been paying underage girls for sexual activities. The investigation, led by Police Chief Michael Ryder, revealed a pattern of abuse that had been occurring for years and involved numerous victims. Ghislaine Maxwell's role in the criminal enterprise became apparent during this investigation, as multiple victims described her involvement in recruiting them, facilitating their abuse, and in some cases directly participating in sexual activities. Her sophisticated demeanor and apparent respectability had been crucial tools in gaining the trust of victims and their families. The investigation faced significant challenges from the beginning due to Epstein and Maxwell's wealth and connections. They were able to hire teams of high-powered attorneys who challenged every aspect of the investigation and worked to discredit victims and witnesses. This legal pressure made it difficult for local law enforcement to conduct a thorough investigation. The case was complicated by the reluctance of many victims to come forward, which was understandable given their age, the shame and trauma associated with their experiences, and the obvious power and resources of their alleged abusers. Those who did come forward faced aggressive legal challenges and public scrutiny that further discouraged others from reporting their experiences. Despite the challenges, the investigation produced sufficient evidence to support criminal charges. However, the case took an unusual turn when federal prosecutors negotiated a controversial plea agreement with Epstein in 2008 that allowed him to plead guilty to lesser state charges while avoiding federal prosecution and maintaining many of his freedoms. This plea agreement, which became known as the Sweetheart Deal, was heavily criticized for its leniency and for the secrecy surrounding its negotiation. Notably, Ghislaine Maxwell was not charged at this time, despite evidence of her involvement in the criminal enterprise. The agreement also included immunity provisions for potential co-conspirators, which may have protected Maxwell from prosecution at that time. The resolution of the first investigation without serious consequences for either Epstein or Maxwell sent a message that their wealth and connections could indeed protect them from the full force of the law. This apparent immunity would embolden them to continue their criminal activities, though with greater caution about exposure. Following the controversial resolution of the initial criminal investigation in 2008, both Epstein and Maxwell appeared to continue their criminal activities while taking greater precautions to avoid detection. The light punishment Epstein received seemed to reinforce their belief that their wealth and connections would protect them from serious legal consequences. Maxwell's role during this period involved maintaining the network of relationships they had built while also adapting their operational methods to reduce the risk of exposure. She continued to facilitate social gatherings and maintain connections with powerful individuals, though with greater awareness of the potential legal risks involved. During this period, Maxwell also began to distance herself somewhat from direct involvement in the more criminal aspects of their operation, though evidence later showed that she remained an active participant in planning and facilitating abuse. This distancing may have been strategic, designed to provide her with plausible deniability if future investigations occurred. The apparent impunity they had achieved following the 2008 plea agreement may have led to overconfidence and complacency. While they took some precautions to avoid detection, they continued to operate their criminal enterprise and maintain the lifestyle and social connections that had facilitated their crimes. Meanwhile, some victims and their advocates continued to pursue civil litigation despite the challenges involved in confronting such wealthy and powerful defendants. These civil cases helped to keep public attention focused on the case and provided additional evidence about the scope and nature of their criminal activities. Investigative journalists also began to take greater interest in the case, particularly as questions arose about the controversial plea agreement and the powerful individuals who had been associated with Epstein and Maxwell. This media attention helped to maintain public awareness of the case and pressure for further investigation. The #MeToo movement, which gained prominence in the late 2010s, also created a cultural environment that was more supportive of sexual abuse victims and more critical of powerful individuals who had escaped accountability for their actions. This changing cultural context would prove significant when new investigations eventually began. The death of Jeffrey Epstein in federal custody in 2019 while awaiting trial on new charges dramatically changed the dynamics of the case and focused renewed attention on Maxwell's role in their criminal enterprise. With Epstein no longer able to face justice, Maxwell became the primary target for prosecutors seeking to hold someone accountable for the extensive criminal operation they had run together. The arrest of Jeffrey Epstein in July 2019 on new federal charges related to sex trafficking marked the beginning of a new phase of investigation that would ultimately lead to Ghislaine Maxwell's prosecution. Epstein's death in federal custody in August 2019 while awaiting trial intensified public demand for accountability and focused attention on his associates, particularly Maxwell. Following Epstein's death, federal prosecutors continued their investigation into the criminal enterprise he had operated, with particular focus on identifying and prosecuting co-conspirators who had facilitated his crimes. Maxwell, given her central role in the operation, became the primary target of this continued investigation. The investigation benefited from advances in investigative techniques, changes in cultural attitudes toward sexual abuse victims, and the extensive evidence that had been gathered during previous investigations. Prosecutors were able to build on the foundation of evidence that had been collected over many years while also benefiting from the willingness of more victims to come forward. Maxwell had gone into hiding following Epstein's arrest and death, recognizing that she was likely to become the focus of renewed investigation. She moved between various properties and took precautions to avoid detection, but federal investigators were able to track her movements through financial records and other surveillance techniques. The defense strategy appeared to focus on several key arguments: that Maxwell was a victim of Epstein's manipulation rather than a willing participant in his crimes, that the government was prosecuting her for crimes primarily committed by Epstein because he was no longer available for prosecution, and that the alleged victims' memories were unreliable due to the passage of time and the influence of media coverage. Prosecutors, by contrast, prepared to present evidence that Maxwell was not merely a passive participant but rather an active facilitator and co-conspirator who had played an essential role in recruiting victims, normalizing abuse, and maintaining the criminal enterprise over many years. Ghislaine Maxwell's trial began on November 29, 2021, in federal court in Manhattan, marking one of the most closely watched criminal trials in recent American history. The proceedings would ultimately determine whether someone could finally be held accountable for the extensive criminal enterprise that had operated for years with apparent impunity. The prosecution's case was built around the testimony of 4 women who described their experiences as teenagers when they were recruited, groomed, and abused through the operation run by Epstein and Maxwell. These witnesses, now adults, provided detailed accounts of how Maxwell had played a crucial role in facilitating their abuse. The first witness, identified as Jane to protect her privacy, testified that she had first met Maxwell and Epstein when she was 14 years old. She described how Maxwell had presented herself as a sophisticated older woman who could provide guidance and opportunities, but had gradually drawn her into increasingly inappropriate situations that culminated in sexual abuse. Carolyn, another key witness, testified about her experiences beginning when she was 14 years old. She described how Maxwell had been present during some abusive encounters and had paid her for recruiting other girls to participate in what were described as massages, but were actually sexual encounters. Kate, a third witness, described meeting Maxwell in the 1990s when she was 17 years old and being gradually drawn into Epstein's orbit through Maxwell's facilitation. She testified about Maxwell's role in normalizing inappropriate behavior and making her feel complicit in activities that she later recognized as abusive. Annie Farmer, the fourth key witness, testified using her real name about her experiences when she was 16 years old. She described how Maxwell had been present during inappropriate touching and had worked to make such behavior seem normal and acceptable. The prosecution also presented extensive documentary evidence, including flight logs showing travel between Epstein's properties, photographs showing Maxwell with various individuals at social gatherings, and financial records demonstrating the operation's scope and her involvement in it. The defense strategy focused on challenging the credibility of the witnesses, arguing that their memories had been influenced by media coverage and the passage of time, and claiming that Maxwell had herself been manipulated by Epstein rather than being a willing participant in criminal activities. Maxwell herself did not testify, exercising her constitutional right to remain silent rather than subjecting herself to cross-examination that could have been damaging to her case. On December 29, 2021, after deliberating for 5 full days, the jury found Ghislaine Maxwell guilty on 5 of the 6 charges against her. The convictions included conspiracy to entice a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, conspiracy to transport a minor with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, transporting a minor with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, conspiracy to commit sex trafficking of minors, and sex trafficking of a minor. The guilty verdict represented a significant victory for prosecutors and, more importantly, for the victims who had waited years for some form of accountability. The convictions demonstrated that even wealthy and well-connected individuals could be held responsible for their crimes when sufficient evidence was presented and victims were willing to come forward. Maxwell's reaction to the verdict was reportedly one of shock and disbelief, suggesting that despite the evidence against her, she had maintained confidence that her social status and legal resources would protect her from conviction. The reality of facing significant prison time represented a dramatic fall from the privileged lifestyle she had known throughout her life. The sentencing phase of the case provided an opportunity for victims to address the court and describe the impact that Maxwell's crimes had had on their lives. Several victims delivered powerful victim impact statements that detailed not only the immediate harm they had suffered but also the long-term psychological and emotional consequences of their experiences. On June 28, 2022, Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, a term that reflected both the seriousness of her crimes and the lasting harm she had caused to her victims. The judge also imposed a $750,000 fine and ordered her to serve 5 years of supervised release following her prison term. The sentence was seen as a significant victory for justice, though some victims and advocates argued that it was insufficient given the scope of her crimes and the number of victims who had been harmed. Others noted that the 20-year sentence would likely mean that Maxwell, who was 60 years old at sentencing, would spend the remainder of her productive life in prison. Judge Allison Nathan, who presided over the case, noted in her sentencing remarks that Maxwell had played an instrumental role in the criminal enterprise and had shown a pattern of predatory behavior toward vulnerable victims. The judge emphasized that Maxwell's crimes had caused lasting harm to multiple victims and warranted substantial punishment. The prosecution and conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell provided a measure of justice for victims who had waited decades for acknowledgement of the harm they had suffered. However, the legal proceedings also revealed the lasting impact that their experiences had had on their lives and the ongoing challenges they faced in recovering from their trauma. The victim impact statements delivered during Maxwell's sentencing hearing provided powerful testimony about the long-term consequences of childhood sexual abuse and trafficking. Victims described struggles with trust, relationships, mental health, and self-worth that had persisted throughout their adult lives. Many victims described feeling betrayed not only by Epstein but particularly by Maxwell, whose maternal demeanor and sophisticated appearance had made her seem trustworthy and protective. The realization that someone who had presented herself as a mentor and friend had actually been facilitating their abuse created particularly deep psychological wounds. The victims also described the additional trauma they had experienced in coming forward to report their abuse, including aggressive legal challenges, public scrutiny, and attacks on their credibility. The power and resources of their abusers had made it difficult to achieve justice and had compounded the harm they had originally suffered. The conviction provided validation for victims who had been doubted or dismissed when they first reported their experiences. The jury's verdict confirmed that their accounts were credible and that the harm they had described was real and significant. However, many victims noted that no legal outcome could fully repair the damage that had been done to their lives. The conviction provided a sense of justice and closure, but it could not undo the years of trauma, therapy, and struggle that had resulted from their childhood experiences. The case also highlighted the importance of supporting victims of sexual abuse and trafficking, both in terms of the legal process and in terms of providing ongoing services to help them recover from their trauma. Several victims became advocates for other survivors and worked to improve support services and legal protections. The publicity surrounding the case also helped to raise awareness about the tactics used by traffickers and the vulnerability of children from troubled backgrounds. This increased awareness has contributed to better training for professionals who work with at-risk youth and improved prevention programs. The Maxwell case had significant implications beyond the specific crimes for which she was convicted, touching on broader issues of wealth, power, and accountability within the American criminal justice system. The successful prosecution demonstrated that even well-connected individuals could be held accountable, but it also revealed the challenges involved in prosecuting such cases. The case highlighted the advantages that wealthy defendants possess in criminal cases, including access to teams of experienced attorneys, resources for extensive investigation and expert testimony, and the ability to challenge every aspect of the prosecution's case. These advantages had enabled Maxwell and Epstein to avoid serious consequences for years despite evidence of their crimes. However, the ultimate conviction also demonstrated that these advantages were not insurmountable when prosecutors had sufficient evidence and were willing to devote the necessary resources to building a strong case. The success of the prosecution provided hope that the criminal justice system could function effectively even when confronting powerful defendants. The case also revealed the importance of changes in cultural attitudes toward sexual abuse victims, particularly the increased willingness to believe victims and the reduced tolerance for the kind of victim blaming that had historically protected abusers. The #MeToo movement and broader cultural changes had created an environment more conducive to achieving justice in such cases. The international aspects of the case, involving crimes committed across multiple jurisdictions and involving defendants with international connections, demonstrated the importance of cooperation between different law enforcement agencies and the need for consistent legal standards in addressing trafficking crimes. The case also highlighted the role of investigative journalism in exposing crimes and maintaining public pressure for accountability. Media coverage had played a crucial role in keeping the case in the public eye and documenting the failures of the initial investigation. The conviction sent an important message about the consequences of facilitating sexual abuse and trafficking, particularly for individuals who use positions of trust and authority to exploit vulnerable victims. This deterrent effect may help prevent similar crimes in the future. The Ghislaine Maxwell case generated extraordinary media attention throughout its various phases, from the initial investigations through her arrest, trial, and conviction. This coverage reflected both legitimate public interest in achieving justice and the sensational aspects of a case involving wealth, power, sex, and celebrity connections. The media coverage served several important functions, including maintaining public awareness of the case, educating the public about trafficking crimes, and creating pressure for law enforcement accountability. However, it also created challenges for ensuring fair legal proceedings and protecting the privacy of victims. The initial investigations in the mid-2000s received relatively limited media attention, reflecting both the lower profile of the case at that time and the power of Epstein and Maxwell to control the narrative through their legal teams and media connections. However, as the case progressed and particularly after Epstein's 2019 arrest, media coverage intensified dramatically. The combination of celebrity connections, allegations of a high-level conspiracy, and the mysterious circumstances of Epstein's death created a perfect storm of public fascination that drove extensive coverage across all forms of media. Social media played a particularly significant role in maintaining public attention and pressure for accountability. Online discussions, conspiracy theories, and grassroots activism helped ensure that the case remained in the public consciousness even during periods when traditional media coverage decreased. The media coverage also revealed tensions between the public's right to information and the need to protect victim privacy and ensure fair legal proceedings. Courts struggled to balance these competing interests while managing intense public and media interest in the case. Documentary films, podcasts, and investigative reports provided detailed examinations of the case that went beyond daily news coverage, helping to educate the public about the complexities of trafficking crimes and the challenges involved in prosecuting powerful defendants. The international media attention also reflected the global nature of the crimes and the international connections of the defendants. Coverage in British media was particularly intense given Maxwell's background and Prince Andrew's connection to the case. The Maxwell-Epstein case became a magnet for conspiracy theories and public speculation that often overshadowed the actual evidence and legal proceedings. The combination of powerful defendants, celebrity connections, and mysterious circumstances created fertile ground for alternative theories about the scope and nature of their criminal enterprise. Many conspiracy theories focused on the idea that Epstein and Maxwell were operating as intelligence assets, using their criminal activities to gather compromising information about powerful individuals for blackmail purposes. While some aspects of their operations certainly involved gathering information about their associates, there was limited evidence to support the more elaborate conspiracy theories that emerged. The mysterious circumstances of Epstein's death in federal custody fueled additional speculation about whether he had been murdered to prevent him from revealing information about other powerful individuals involved in his crimes. While official investigations concluded that his death was suicide, public skepticism persisted and influenced perceptions of the broader case. Social media platforms became venues for extensive discussion and speculation about the case, with some theories gaining significant followings despite lacking factual basis. These discussions often mixed legitimate questions about the case with unfounded speculation and partisan political interpretations. The proliferation of conspiracy theories created challenges for both law enforcement and media coverage, as factual reporting had to compete with more sensational but unsubstantiated claims. This environment made it more difficult for the public to distinguish between verified facts and speculation. However, the intense public interest also served positive purposes by maintaining pressure for accountability and preventing the case from being quietly resolved without serious consequences. The public's demand for justice helped ensure that Maxwell would ultimately face trial despite her wealth and connections. Some conspiracy theories also reflected legitimate concerns about the power of wealth and connections to influence legal outcomes, even if the specific theories were unfounded. The case did reveal real problems with how the criminal justice system had initially handled the allegations against Epstein and Maxwell. The Maxwell case had significant international dimensions that complicated both the investigation and prosecution. Maxwell's British citizenship, her international properties and financial holdings, and the global nature of the criminal enterprise created complex jurisdictional and legal challenges. Maxwell's attempt to avoid prosecution by hiding in various locations demonstrated the challenges law enforcement faces when pursuing international criminals with significant resources. Her ability to move between countries and maintain multiple identities reflected the advantages possessed by wealthy defendants in evading justice. The case also involved potential evidence and witnesses located in multiple countries, requiring extensive international cooperation and coordination between law enforcement agencies. This cooperation was generally successful but highlighted the importance of strong international legal frameworks for addressing transnational crimes. British authorities faced particular scrutiny regarding their handling of allegations against Prince Andrew and their cooperation with American investigators. The case created tensions between protecting a member of the royal family and supporting international law enforcement efforts. The international aspects of the case also revealed differences in legal systems and approaches to prosecuting sexual abuse and trafficking crimes. These differences could potentially be exploited by defendants seeking to avoid prosecution or minimize penalties. Financial investigations required cooperation between banking and regulatory authorities in multiple countries to track the complex financial arrangements that had supported the criminal enterprise. These investigations revealed the challenges of addressing international financial crimes and the importance of cooperation between regulatory authorities. The case contributed to discussions about strengthening international legal frameworks for addressing trafficking crimes and ensuring that wealthy defendants cannot simply flee to jurisdictions with more favorable legal environments. The successful prosecution of Ghislaine Maxwell established important legal precedents that will influence future cases involving sex trafficking and the prosecution of facilitators and co-conspirators in such crimes. The case demonstrated that individuals who recruit and facilitate trafficking can face serious federal charges even if they did not directly engage in all aspects of the abuse. The case clarified legal standards regarding the prosecution of individuals who facilitate sex trafficking through recruitment, grooming, and logistical support. Maxwell's conviction demonstrated that active participation in recruiting and facilitating abuse could result in the same serious penalties as more direct forms of participation. The use of conspiracy charges proved particularly effective in addressing the complex criminal enterprise that Maxwell and Epstein had operated. These charges allowed prosecutors to address the full scope of the criminal operation rather than focusing only on specific incidents of abuse. The case also contributed to legal discussions about the statute of limitations for sex trafficking and abuse cases, particularly those involving victims who were minors at the time of the crimes. The successful prosecution despite the passage of many years may influence future cases with similar timing issues. The victim testimony in the Maxwell case provided important precedents for how historic abuse cases can be successfully prosecuted despite challenges related to memory, the passage of time, and attempts to discredit victims. The jury's acceptance of victim testimony sent a strong message about the credibility of abuse survivors. The case influenced discussions about appropriate penalties for trafficking facilitators and the factors that should be considered in sentencing such defendants. Maxwell's 20-year sentence established a benchmark for similar cases while also generating debate about whether such penalties are sufficient. The international cooperation required for the case contributed to strengthening legal frameworks for addressing transnational trafficking crimes and may influence future cooperation agreements between countries facing similar challenges. While Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction represented a significant achievement in terms of accountability, many questions about the full scope of the criminal enterprise remain unanswered. Ongoing investigations continue to examine other potential co-conspirators and the broader network that may have facilitated their crimes. Several high-profile individuals who were associated with Epstein and Maxwell continue to face scrutiny, though formal charges have not been filed against most of them. The extent to which other individuals may have been involved in or aware of the criminal activities remains an open question. Civil litigation continues against various individuals and entities that may have facilitated or enabled the criminal enterprise. These cases may reveal additional information about the scope of the operation and could result in financial accountability for those who cannot be criminally prosecuted. Investigations into the financial aspects of the operation continue, with authorities working to trace money flows and identify assets that may be subject to forfeiture. These financial investigations may reveal additional information about how the criminal enterprise was funded and operated. Questions remain about the extent of Maxwell and Epstein's activities in other jurisdictions and whether additional victims may come forward with allegations from other locations or time periods. The international nature of their operation suggests that the full scope may not yet be known. The handling of the initial investigation and the controversial plea agreement that Epstein received in 2008 continue to be subjects of scrutiny and official review. These reviews may lead to reforms in how such cases are handled in the future. Ongoing research into the psychological and social factors that enabled the criminal enterprise may contribute to better prevention and detection of similar crimes in the future. Understanding how such operations develop and persist could inform both law enforcement and child protection efforts. The prosecution and conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell represents a watershed moment in the pursuit of justice for victims of sex trafficking and abuse by powerful individuals. Her case demonstrated that wealth, social connections, and sophisticated legal representation cannot ultimately shield criminals from accountability when sufficient evidence exists and prosecutors are willing to pursue justice aggressively. For the victims who came forward to testify against Maxwell, the conviction provided a measure of validation and justice that had been denied for decades. Their courage in facing aggressive cross-examination and public scrutiny was essential to achieving accountability and may encourage other victims to come forward in similar cases. The case revealed both the advantages possessed by wealthy defendants and the potential for the criminal justice system to overcome these advantages when properly functioning. Maxwell's conviction showed that no one is truly above the law, though it also demonstrated the extensive resources and time required to prosecute such cases successfully. The international dimensions of the case highlighted the importance of cooperation between law enforcement agencies and the need for consistent legal standards in addressing transnational crimes. The successful prosecution required unprecedented cooperation and coordination between multiple agencies and jurisdictions. The psychological and social factors that enabled Maxwell and Epstein's criminal enterprise provide important lessons for preventing similar crimes in the future. Understanding how they identified vulnerable victims, exploited social connections, and maintained their operation for years can inform both prevention efforts and law enforcement training. The case also demonstrated the evolving role of media and public opinion in criminal justice, showing both the benefits of maintaining public attention and pressure for accountability and the challenges created by intense scrutiny and speculation. The balance between transparency and fair legal proceedings remains an ongoing challenge in high-profile cases. The conviction sent an important message about the consequences of facilitating sex trafficking and abuse, particularly for individuals who exploit positions of trust and authority. This deterrent effect may help prevent similar crimes and encourage others who might have information about such crimes to come forward. The ongoing civil litigation and investigation suggest that the full reckoning with the Maxwell-Epstein criminal enterprise is not yet complete. Additional accountability and reforms may emerge as these processes continue and as society grapples with the broader implications of the case. From a historical perspective, the Maxwell case represents a significant moment in the evolution of how society addresses sex trafficking and abuse by powerful individuals. The successful prosecution marked a departure from previous patterns where such crimes often went unpunished due to the influence and resources of the perpetrators. The case also highlighted the importance of supporting victims throughout the legal process and beyond, recognizing that legal proceedings, while necessary for accountability, cannot fully repair the harm caused by such crimes. The ongoing needs of survivors must remain a priority even after legal cases are resolved. Looking forward, the lessons learned from the Maxwell case should inform efforts to strengthen legal protections for victims, improve law enforcement training and resources, and develop better prevention programs to protect vulnerable individuals from exploitation. The case provides a roadmap for how such complex prosecutions can succeed while also revealing areas where improvements are needed. The conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell will be remembered as a significant victory for justice and a demonstration that even the most powerful individuals can be held accountable for their crimes. However, the case also serves as a reminder of how much work remains to be done to protect vulnerable individuals and ensure that justice is accessible to all victims of serious crimes. The legacy of this case should include not only the satisfaction of seeing justice served but also a commitment to the ongoing work of preventing such crimes, supporting survivors, and building legal and social systems that are more effective at protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. Only through such continued efforts can society ensure that the suffering endured by Maxwell's victims contributes to meaningful progress in the fight against trafficking and abuse.